secret. What kind of shit is that? Most people want to borrow sugar, or even ketchup. You want to borrow my...
The behind-the-scenes story of Friday feels simple when you watch it, almost like nothing complicated could have possibly gone into making something so relaxed, so natural, so effortlessly funny. But that simplicity is actually what makes the real story so surprising, because behind that laid-back one-day storyline was a production full of risks, improvisation, uncertainty, and creative decisions that could have easily gone wrong at any moment. Around 30 years ago, a 26-year-old rapper, Ice Cube, who had never written a screenplay before, teamed up with DJ Pooh to create something that would end up becoming one of the most quoted comedies in American film history. It was made on a tight budget of just $3.5 million, filmed in about 20 days, and shot almost entirely on one real street in South Central Los Angeles. It looked easy on screen, but behind the scenes, almost everything about it was unpredictable. The idea itself didn't come from a studio plan or a commercial trend. It came from frustration. Ice Cube and DJ Pooh were tired of seeing their neighborhoods portrayed only through violence and struggle in films like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. Those films were important, but they showed only one side of the reality. What was missing was the everyday life, the humor, the personalities, the way people actually spent their time sitting on porches, joking with neighbors, and dealing with small, relatable problems. They wanted to show that version, a day in the life that wasn't dramatic in a traditional sense, but still meaningful. That concept, simple as it sounds, was actually risky because Hollywood wasn't used to telling those kinds of stories without adding violence or heavy conflict. Even the structure of the film was unusual. Instead of a complex plot, it focused on one day, one block, and a handful of characters. That approach was inspired partly by Clerks, a low-budget film that proved you could build something engaging out of ordinary conversations and situations. Ice Cube and DJ Pooh took that idea and applied it to their own world, filling the script with real experiences, real personalities, and moments pulled directly from life. Craig getting fired, Smokey dealing with small-time problems, neighbors arguing over nothing and everything at the same time. It all came from things they had seen or lived through. Casting, however, almost changed the entire direction of the film. The role of Smokey, which became iconic, was not originally guaranteed to Chris Tucker. The studio wanted someone with a bigger profile, and names like Chris Rock and Tommy Davidson were considered. When Tucker first auditioned, he didn't stand out. He followed the script too closely, playing it safe, and the energy just wasn't there. It was only after he realized he could improvise, could bring his own personality into the role, that everything changed. That shift turned Smokey into something unforgettable, a character that felt spontaneous, unpredictable, and completely alive. The location added another layer of authenticity that can't be recreated. The film was shot on a real street where director F. Gary Gray had actually grown up. These weren't sets designed to look real. These were real homes, real surroundings, real people living in that environment. Even some of the unexpected moments during filming, like actual locals appearing in the background or interacting with the production, became part of the film's texture. It blurred the line between movie and reality in a way that added to its uniqueness. At the same time, the production itself reflected the limitations of its budget. The cast was paid relatively small amounts compared to what the film would eventually earn, and everyone understood that they were taking a chance on something that might not succeed. But that limitation also created a certain kind of freedom. Without the pressure of a massive budget, there was room for improvisation, for experimentation, for letting scenes develop naturally instead of forcing them into a strict structure. That freedom is especially visible in performances like John Witherspoon as Craig's father, where many of the most memorable lines came from improvisation rather than the script. His delivery, timing, and ability to turn simple moments into something iconic added a layer of humor that couldn't have been planned in advance. Similarly, Tommy Lister Jr. brought a physical presence to the character of Debo that made the role instantly believable. His background in wrestling gave him a natural intensity that didn't need to be acted. What makes all of this even more interesting is how many small details turned into lasting cultural moments. Lines that were originally written as throwaways, like "Bye Felicia," became part of everyday language years later, especially with the rise of social media. Visual choices, like wardrobe coordination or subtle references to earlier films, added layers that most viewers didn't consciously notice, but still felt. Over time, the film grew far beyond its original expectations. It became more than just a comedy. It became a cultural reference point, something people returned to again and again because it felt familiar. It captured a specific kind of experience in a way that didn't feel forced or exaggerated, and that authenticity is what allowed it to last. Looking deeper into the production, one of the most fascinating aspects is how close the film came to feeling completely different. At multiple stages, small decisions could have changed everything. If the studio had insisted on a more traditional structure, the film might have included more dramatic conflict or a more conventional storyline. If casting had gone in a different direction, the chemistry between characters could have shifted entirely. And if the production had been moved to a controlled set environment, it would have lost the raw, lived-in feeling that defines it. There was also a certain level of unpredictability that came from filming in a real neighborhood rather than a controlled studio space. The environment was not entirely under the filmmaker's control, and that meant adapting in real time. Situations that might have been seen as obstacles in a larger production became part of the process here. It required flexibility, quick thinking, and a willingness to accept imperfections, which ultimately contributed to the film's authenticity. Another layer that often goes unnoticed is the rhythm of the dialogue. The conversations in Friday don't feel scripted in the traditional sense. They feel like real exchanges, with pauses, overlaps, and moments that seem almost accidental. That effect comes from a combination of writing and performance, but also from the environment itself. Being in a real location, surrounded by real energy, allowed the actors to respond to each other in a more natural way. The influence of music on the film also plays a significant role in shaping its identity. Ice Cube's background in music brought a certain sensibility to the pacing and tone, almost like the film itself moves with the rhythm of a track. Scenes flow into each other without feeling forced, and there's a sense of timing that mirrors the structure of a song rather than a traditional screenplay. As the film gained popularity, its impact began to extend beyond entertainment. It became part of everyday conversation, with lines, characters, and moments being referenced in ways that went far beyond the original context. This kind of cultural integration is rare, especially for a film that started with such limited resources. It shows how authenticity can resonate more deeply than scale or budget. Even decades later, the film continues to find new audiences. People who were not around when it was first released still connect with it, still quote it, still recognize its characters. That longevity is not something that can be manufactured. It comes from a combination of relatability, timing, and a certain kind of honesty that doesn't fade over time. At the same time, the idea of continuing the story, of creating another installment, raises its own set of questions. Can something that was built so naturally be recreated in a different context? Can the same energy exist when the circumstances are no longer the same? These are questions that don't have simple answers, and they highlight how unique the original film really is. In many ways, Friday represents a moment that can't be repeated. It came together under specific conditions with specific people at a specific time. Trying to recreate that exact combination would be difficult, not because the talent isn't there, but because the circumstances themselves have changed. What remains, however, is the film itself, a snapshot of a particular place, a particular time, and a particular way of seeing the world. It doesn't try to be larger than life, and that's exactly why it feels so real. It captures something that audiences recognize, even if they can't always explain why. And that might be the most important part of the story. Not the budget, not the production timeline, not even the individual facts behind the scenes, but the way everything came together to create something that feels genuine, something that doesn't rely on spectacle or scale, but on connection. Because at the end of the day, Friday works for a very simple reason. It reflects real life, not in a dramatic or exaggerated way, but in a way that feels familiar. And that familiarity is what keeps it alive, long after the cameras stopped rolling.